Stop for a moment, because this story begins on a night when two people who had spent months pretending they could live without each other found themselves sitting on opposite sides of the same cold jail cell. Neither of them had planned to be there. Neither had expected to see the other under fluorescent lights, behind locked doors, with nowhere left to hide from the truth they had both been avoiding. And what happened before sunrise would change the way everyone around them understood their story. The rain had started just after midnight, tapping against the narrow windows of the county station like impatient fingers. Outside, the parking lot shimmered beneath streetlights, empty except for a few police vehicles and one abandoned sedan with its headlights still glowing. Inside, she sat on a hard metal bench, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her name was Elena. Across the room, separated from her by a glass partition, sat Daniel. For 3 months, they had not spoken. Not one phone call. Not one message. Not even a birthday wish. Their separation had not happened because the love between them disappeared. That would have been easier. It happened because one painful misunderstanding had grown into a wall neither of them knew how to climb. And now, somehow, that wall had brought them to the same place. Daniel looked up. Their eyes met through the glass. For several seconds, neither moved. Then Elena looked away. She had promised herself she would never cry in front of him again. But why had life placed them face to face on the one night when both of them were already at their breaking point? Earlier that evening, Elena had been driving home when she saw a commotion outside a small neighborhood store. A frightened elderly man had dropped his wallet, and someone had accused him of stealing from the register. Elena had stepped in, insisting that the accusation was wrong. Daniel had arrived minutes later for an entirely different reason. He had been following a friend who had called him for help after witnessing an argument nearby. Neither knew the situation would spiral. Neither knew a misunderstanding would turn into accusations. And neither imagined they would both be taken to the station for questioning. But there was something neither of them knew yet. Someone else had been watching the entire situation. Someone who had seen what really happened. As the hours passed, the station became quieter. The officers spoke in low voices. Phones rang occasionally in distant rooms. A vending machine hummed beneath the dim hallway lights. Finally, an officer opened the door and told them they would have to remain there until morning while the situation was sorted out. Elena lowered her eyes. Daniel exhaled slowly. They were placed in the same holding area because the station was overcrowded. The irony almost made Elena laugh. Almost. Instead, she whispered, "Of all places." Daniel heard her. He gave a tired half-smile. Yeah. That was the first word they had exchanged in 94 days. Elena looked at him. "You don't have to talk to me." "I know." "Then don't." "I wasn't planning to." She nodded. Silence returned. But this silence was different from the one they had shared before. Before, silence had been punishment. Tonight, it was exhaustion. Daniel leaned his head against the wall. After several minutes, he quietly said, "You still tap your fingers when you're nervous." Elena froze. She looked down. Her fingers were tapping against her palm. She stopped immediately. You remember that? Daniel stared at the floor. I remember everything. Those 4 words landed harder than any apology could have. Elena swallowed. She wanted to ask what he meant. She wanted to ask why he had never called. She wanted to ask why he had let her believe she meant nothing to him. But another question frightened her more. What if his answer changed everything? She remained silent. Then Daniel reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small folded piece of paper. Elena recognized it instantly. Her breath caught. It was an old note she had written him almost a year earlier. She had written it on a night when Daniel had been struggling with his family, uncertain about his future, and convinced that he was failing everyone around him. She had written only one sentence. You don't have to be strong every minute of your life. Daniel had kept it. All this time. Elena stared at the paper. Why do you still have that? Daniel's eyes became wet, but he quickly looked away. Because I needed it. The room suddenly felt smaller. Elena's anger began to crack beneath something more painful. You could have told me. I tried. When? More times than you know. She shook her head. No. You disappeared. I disappeared because I thought you had chosen someone else. Elena stared at him. What? Daniel finally looked directly at her. I saw you leaving that restaurant with him. Her face changed. That was my brother. Daniel went completely still. For months, he had believed he had witnessed the beginning of another relationship. For months, Elena had believed Daniel had simply stopped caring. And suddenly, the entire foundation of their separation shifted. But Daniel wasn't finished. There was something else, he whispered. Elena waited. He looked down at the folded paper in his hand. The night I stopped calling you. I had already bought the ring. Elena's breath disappeared. She couldn't speak. Daniel reached into his other pocket. His hand trembled as he pulled out a tiny velvet box. It wasn't polished or perfect anymore. The edges were worn from being carried too many times. Elena stared at it. You kept that? I couldn't throw it away. For the first time that night, tears slipped down her face. But before she could say anything, footsteps echoed from the hallway. An officer entered carrying a file. His expression was completely different from before. He looked at Daniel. Then Elena. Then the file in his hands. I need to speak with both of you. Daniel stood. Elena wiped her tears. The officer closed the door behind him. We reviewed the security footage from the store. Neither of them spoke. You weren't responsible for what happened tonight. Elena released a shaky breath. Daniel looked relieved. But the officer didn't stop there. There is something else. He opened the file. The footage shows that someone deliberately created the misunderstanding that brought you both here. Elena's heart began pounding. Who? The officer hesitated. Then he placed a photograph on the table. Daniel leaned forward. His expression changed instantly. Elena looked at the photograph, and the color drained from her face. Because the person standing outside the store that night wasn't a stranger. It was someone both of them knew. Someone who had known about their separation. Someone who had a reason to keep them apart. And beneath the photograph was a handwritten statement that revealed one more devastating truth. The misunderstanding between Elena and Daniel had never been an accident. Someone had planned it. Someone had spent months making sure they would never find their way back to each other. But why? And what did that person fear would happen if Elena and Daniel discovered the truth before sunrise? Daniel looked at Elena. She looked back at him. For the first time in months, neither of them looked away. Then the officer quietly said something that neither of them would ever forget. "You should know, this person asked about you too earlier tonight." Elena's heart sank. Daniel tightened his grip around the little velvet box. And somewhere beyond the locked doors of that station, someone was already making their next move. The photograph remained on the table, but neither Elena nor Daniel touched it. For several seconds, the only sound in the room was the faint ticking of the clock above the doorway. Then Elena whispered a name. "Marcus." Daniel looked at her sharply. "You know him?" She nodded slowly. "He worked with my father." The officer exchanged a glance with another detective standing near the door. That glance told Elena more than words could have. There was a story behind this. And somehow, she and Daniel had been placed inside the middle of it. Marcus had never been someone Elena considered dangerous. He had attended family gatherings. He had helped her father with business matters. He had once brought groceries to their house when Elena's mother was sick. He had been trusted. That was what made the discovery so difficult to accept. Daniel leaned against the table. "Why would he want us apart?" The officer didn't answer immediately. Instead, he opened another folder. Inside were copies of messages, photographs, and handwritten notes collected over several months. Elena's hands began to tremble. There were pictures of her leaving work. Daniel entering his apartment. Their families. Places they had both visited. Dates. Times. The investigation had apparently begun long before either of them realized they were being watched. But one photograph stopped Elena completely. It showed Daniel standing outside a hospital. She remembered that day. It had been the day she believed Daniel had deliberately ignored her call. She had spent that entire evening crying, convinced he had chosen to walk away. Yet the photograph revealed something she had never known. Daniel had been at the hospital because his younger sister had suffered an accident. He had been there alone. And the message Elena had received that night, the one that said he didn't want to see her anymore, had never been written by him. Someone had sent it from a number that looked almost identical to his. Daniel stared at the evidence. "So that's why you stopped answering me," he said quietly. Elena's eyes filled. "I thought you didn't want me anymore. And I thought you had moved on." They looked at each other with the strange grief of two people realizing they had spent months mourning something that had never actually died. The officer gathered the papers. "We believe someone intentionally manipulated communication between you. But we don't know the full reason yet. Elena looked at the velvet box in Daniel's hand. Then why did he want us separated? The detective's expression hardened. That is what we're trying to determine. A moment later, another officer entered carrying a phone. He placed it on the table. We recovered this from the vehicle outside. Elena recognized it. It belonged to Marcus. Daniel stepped closer. The screen was already open. There was one unsent message. The detective read it aloud. If they discover what her father left behind, everything changes. Elena felt the room tilt. My father? Her father had died 2 years earlier. For all this time, she had believed there were no unanswered questions surrounding his death. Now suddenly, the past had opened a door she had never known existed. Daniel looked at her. What did your father leave behind? I don't know. But the words barely escaped her mouth before she remembered something. A locked wooden drawer. An old desk in her father's study. She had been told never to open it. Her father had said there were documents inside that belonged to the family and would be given to her when the time was right. But after his death, Marcus had helped organize the house. The drawer had disappeared. Elena's face went pale. He took it. The officer looked up. Took what? My father's drawer. She described it. The detective immediately wrote something down. Daniel reached for Elena's hand. This time, she didn't pull away. But what neither of them noticed was that the officer near the doorway had quietly stepped outside. He made a phone call. And when he returned, his expression had changed. We have a problem. Everyone turned toward him. Marcus isn't at his home. Where is he? Daniel asked. We don't know. The officer paused. But someone just used his phone. Elena's stomach tightened. Who? The officer looked directly at her. Your mother. The word struck like a sudden silence. Elena stared at him. My mother is asleep at home. The officer shook his head. She called Marcus 12 minutes ago. Daniel immediately understood. Then someone is at her house. The room exploded into motion. Officers grabbed their equipment. Elena stood so quickly the chair scraped against the floor. I have to go. You can't, the detective said. My mother is there. We'll send a unit. Elena's voice broke. She doesn't know anything about this. Daniel stepped beside her. I'm going with her. The detective looked at him. You're still under investigation. Daniel didn't move. Then investigate me from the car. For the first time that night, Elena almost smiled. Not because anything was funny. Because after months of believing she had lost him, she suddenly understood something. Daniel had never stopped choosing her. He had simply been fighting a battle she didn't know existed. Minutes later, the two of them were driven toward Elena's neighborhood. The rain had stopped. The streets were nearly empty. Streetlights passed across their faces in slow intervals. Elena sat beside Daniel in silence. Then she said, I owe you an apology. He shook his head. We both do. She looked at him. No. I should have asked. I should have stayed. Those words carried more weight than either expected. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out the old note again. You know what the hardest part was? What? I kept reading this when I was alone. Elena looked at him. And what did it say to you? Daniel smiled sadly. That maybe love isn't proven by never leaving. He folded the paper carefully. Maybe it's proven by finding the courage to come back when you finally understand why you left. Elena looked through the window. Her eyes filled again. But before she could respond, the police car suddenly slowed. The house was ahead. Every light was off. Elena's mother always left the kitchen light on. Always. Daniel noticed it too. Something's wrong. The vehicle stopped. Officers moved toward the front door. Elena waited inside the car, gripping the edge of the seat. Then the front door opened. An officer emerged. His face was serious. Elena, he called. She stepped out. Where's my mother? The officer hesitated. She isn't here. Elena felt her knees weaken. What do you mean? The house is empty. Then he handed her something. A small envelope. Her name was written across the front. In handwriting she recognized instantly. Her father's handwriting. Elena stared at it, unable to breathe. He's been dead for 2 years, she whispered. Daniel stood beside her. The detective carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single photograph. It showed Elena as a child standing between her parents. But written on the back were 7 words. There is someone in this family you cannot trust. Elena looked at Daniel. Then at the dark house. And finally at the photograph. Suddenly, the entire story changed. Marcus might not have been the person controlling everything. He might have been protecting someone. Someone much closer. Someone who had been watching Elena since childhood. And just as the detective turned the photograph over again, Elena noticed something hidden behind it. A second piece of paper. She pulled it free. There was only one sentence. Her father's final warning. If Daniel ever comes back into your life, tell him what happened the night I died. Daniel went completely still. Because there was something Elena had never told him. Something she had buried so deeply that even she had tried to forget it. She slowly turned toward him. I was there that night. Daniel's face changed. You saw your father before he died? Elena nodded. And he wasn't alone. The detective stepped closer. Who was with him? Elena looked down at the photograph. Her voice became barely audible. I don't know. Then she looked up. But I remember the voice. Daniel's eyes narrowed. What did the person say? Elena closed her eyes. And after 2 years of silence, she finally remembered the one sentence she had heard through the half-open study door. A sentence that now made everything terrifyingly clear. He said. She opened her eyes. He said, "Once she's gone, they'll never find the truth." Daniel stared at her. The detective reached for his radio. And from somewhere inside the dark house, a phone began to ring. Not Elena's. Not Daniel's. A phone they had never seen before. And when the ringing suddenly stopped, a message appeared on Elena's screen. "You finally remembered." The message remained on Elena's screen. "You finally remembered." For a moment, nobody moved. Then the phone rang again. This time, the detective answered it on speaker. No one spoke. There was only breathing on the other end. Slow. Controlled. Almost familiar. Then a man's voice said, "Elena, you were never supposed to find that photograph." She closed her eyes. She knew that voice. Not from the night her father died. Not from some distant memory. From hundreds of ordinary moments. Family dinners. Christmas mornings. Her father's office. Hospital waiting rooms. The voice belonged to Marcus. But there was something different in his tone now. He wasn't threatening her. He sounded exhausted. Almost broken. "Where is my mother?" Elena asked. A pause. "She's safe." "Where?" "She asked me to help her disappear for a few hours." Elena's heart stopped. "My mother knows about this?" "She has known more than you realize." Daniel stepped closer. "Then tell us the truth." Marcus was silent. Finally, he said, "Your father discovered that someone had been stealing money from his company. He thought it was me." Elena stared at the phone. "But it wasn't." "No." "Who was it?" Another silence. Then Marcus answered. "Your father's business partner." Elena remembered the man immediately. Richard. The quiet man who had stood beside her family after her father's death. The man who had delivered the eulogy. The man who had told Elena that her father had been under enormous stress before he died. The man who had encouraged her to sell the family property. The man who had insisted that she stop asking questions. Everything suddenly connected. Marcus continued. "Your father found proof. He hid the evidence before Richard could take it." "Where?" "In the drawer you thought disappeared." Elena's eyes widened. "It wasn't destroyed?" "No." "Where is it?" Marcus gave a location. The detective immediately wrote it down. But Elena wasn't listening anymore. She was thinking about her father. About the last night. About the half-open study door. About the voice she had heard. Richard had been there. And suddenly the memory returned in full. Her father had been arguing with him. Not Marcus. Richard. Her father had said, "You can't erase what you did." Then Richard had turned toward the doorway. Toward the little girl hiding there. Toward Elena. But instead of approaching her, he had whispered to her father, "She'll never understand what she saw." Elena opened her eyes. "I remember." Daniel looked at her. "What?" "My father knew Richard was there." The detective immediately called for another unit. But Elena's mother arrived before anyone could leave. She stepped out of a second police vehicle, wrapped in a gray coat, tears running down her face. Elena ran to her. They held each other in the driveway. For the first time in years, Elena's mother stopped pretending she had all the answers. "I was afraid," she whispered. Elena pulled back. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because your father made me promise." "Promise what?" "To protect you from the truth until you were strong enough to survive it." Elena stared at her mother. Then she understood. All those years, her mother hadn't been hiding the truth because she didn't trust Elena. She had been carrying it because she loved her daughter enough to carry the weight alone. And sometimes, the people who love us most are not withholding answers to hurt us. Sometimes they're waiting for the moment when those answers will no longer destroy us. The evidence was found before dawn. Hidden inside an old storage compartment beneath the floorboards of the family property was a collection of documents proving that Richard had manipulated financial records and attempted to take control of the company. There was also a recording. Her father's final recording. Elena listened with Daniel beside her. Her father's voice filled the quiet room. "If you're hearing this, then I wasn't able to finish what I started. But don't spend your life searching for someone to blame. Protect your mother. Protect yourself. And remember this." The recording paused. Then his voice softened. "Fear can make good people hide. But love eventually teaches them to step into the light." Elena covered her mouth. Her father hadn't known whether she would ever hear those words. But somehow, years later, they had reached her. The investigation moved quickly. Richard was questioned. The evidence was enough to expose the deception that had surrounded the family for years. Marcus was cleared of the suspicion surrounding him. And the mystery of the jail night finally became clear. He had followed Elena that evening because he had been trying to protect her. He had never intended to separate her from Daniel. In fact, Marcus had been the one who secretly arranged for the old messages between them to be recovered. He had hoped the truth would eventually bring them together. But the police misunderstanding had happened because Richard's final attempt to interfere had gone wrong. A chain of accidents had placed Elena and Daniel in the same holding room. And strangely, that unexpected night behind locked doors had given them something years of freedom never could. An honest conversation. No distractions. No assumptions. No pride. Just two people finally standing in front of everything they had been too afraid to say. By sunrise, they were released. The sky had turned pale gold. The rain clouds were disappearing. Elena stood outside the station, holding the velvet box Daniel had carried for so long. She looked at him. "You still have it." Daniel smiled. "I never stopped hoping I'd get the chance to give it to you." She opened the box. Inside was a simple ring. Nothing extravagant. Nothing designed to impress anyone. Just something chosen by a man who had once believed he had lost the woman he loved. Elena looked at him through tears. "I don't want the life we imagined before." Daniel's expression fell slightly. Then she smiled. "I want something better." He waited. I want the life we choose now. Knowing the truth. Knowing that things can break. Knowing that misunderstandings can hurt us. But also knowing that when everything gets complicated, we talk instead of running. Daniel nodded. And if we get scared? We stay. If we disagree? We listen. And if life gets difficult? Elena reached for his hand. We remember this night. Daniel laughed softly. The jail night? She smiled. The night we finally stopped being afraid of the truth. He slipped the ring onto her finger. No crowd gathered. No music played. There was no perfect cinematic moment waiting for them. There were only two tired people beneath a morning sky, choosing each other again. And somehow, that was more beautiful. Months later, Elena reopened her father's company with her mother. Daniel helped from a distance at first, careful not to become another person who made decisions for her. Eventually, they built something together. Not just a business. A life. And Elena kept one photograph on her desk. Not the photograph that had frightened her. Another one. A picture taken the morning they left the station. Her mother stood beside them. Marcus stood a few steps away. Daniel was smiling. Elena was laughing. And beneath the photograph, she wrote a sentence her father had taught her without ever knowing she would need it. Truth may arrive late, but it never arrives empty-handed. Years passed. The story of the night they spent in jail became something their family told at gatherings. Sometimes they laughed about it. Sometimes Elena became quiet. Because she knew how close she had come to believing the wrong story about her own life. She had almost spent forever thinking Daniel abandoned her. Daniel had almost spent forever thinking she chose someone else. Her mother had almost carried a secret until the end of her life. Marcus had almost been condemned for something he didn't do. And Richard had almost succeeded in burying the truth beneath years of fear. But one unexpected night changed everything. Not because the night itself was magical. Because two people finally stopped running from what they needed to hear. And perhaps that is the part of the story worth carrying with you. Sometimes your life can look completely locked. Every door seems closed. Every explanation seems impossible. You may even believe that the people you love have forgotten you, chosen someone else, or walked away forever. But never build your entire future around an assumption you were too hurt to question. Ask. Listen. Forgive when forgiveness is deserved. Set boundaries when they are necessary. And when the truth finally arrives, don't be afraid of it simply because it changes the story you believed. Sometimes the truth doesn't destroy your life. Sometimes it releases you from the life you were never meant to live. Elena thought the jail cell was the worst place her story could have taken her. Instead, it became the place where her old story ended. She entered that night believing she had lost Daniel. She walked out realizing she had never truly lost him. She had only lost the version of their relationship built on silence. And perhaps you have something like that in your own life. Perhaps there is a conversation you have been avoiding. Perhaps there is forgiveness waiting. Perhaps there is a truth you are finally strong enough to face. Don't rush it. Don't force it. But don't let fear decide your future either. Because sometimes the door you think is closing is simply leading you toward another one. And sometimes the darkest chapter isn't the end of the story. It's the page where everything finally begins to make sense. So if this story found you at the right moment, remember this. You are not required to understand every unanswered question tonight. You are not required to have every piece of your future figured out. Take one honest step. Then another. Let truth guide you. Let wisdom slow you down. Let love make you courageous, not blind. And if someone you love is worth rebuilding with, choose honesty over pride. Choose conversation over assumptions. Choose patience over fear. Because the most beautiful endings are rarely perfect. They are earned. They are built by people who were hurt, became wiser, and still found the courage to hope again. May your heart be given peace where there has been confusion. May you receive clarity where there has been uncertainty. May the people who are meant to stay in your life find the courage to communicate, the humility to apologize, and the strength to choose truth. May you have wisdom to recognize what deserves another chance and courage to release what does not. And may your next chapter bring you a kind of peace that no misunderstanding can take away. If this story touched something inside you, don't just scroll away. Take a breath. Carry the message with you. And if you want more cinematic stories of love, faith, truth, and unexpected second chances, subscribe to the channel and stay with us for the next story. Because sometimes the moment you think the story is over is the exact moment the truth begins.